today is Friday, September the 2nd. This is Your Bytes, Your Rights. Jeff, what are we doing today?
Hi, everyone. As Chris said, we're Your Bytes, Your Rights. We are a live weekly discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In episode 28, we talk about the Twitter whistleblower complaint. On July 6th, 2022, Twitter's former head of security, Peter Zatko, who's known as Mudge, filed a whistleblower complaint with the FTC. It was made public just shortly, a couple weeks ago, on Tuesday, August 24th, and caused, you might say, a little bit of a stir. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm Jeff Jokish, founder of Privacy Plan, a local data privacy researcher. I sort of live at the intersection of privacy and the data about privacy. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kmeyer, managing partner at Sustany Capital. Chris runs a VC firm that focuses on blockchain tech. He's into privacy, identity, the future of money, and central bank digital currencies. Say hi, Chris.
Hey, Jeff. Don't talk to you often enough, only twice a week.
Maybe a little more often. And we've got with us a couple of panelists here, one who's already here and one who's on the way. Let's talk to James Azar, CISO at Glorify. James, you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, James Azar. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer for a brand new financial fintech, financial services startup. We're recording September 2nd, and we'll be launching in a few weeks, but we're kind of trying to change the game when it comes to financial services, and we're excited about it. And being a CISO is always a lot of fun, and this whistleblower complaint's actually right up our alley, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, as my CEO would say, he goes, "Those security guys, they keep a record of everything. You should know better."
That's the problem to begin with, right? Can't forget anything that you digitally observed.
Well, can we just say that once it's digital, it's forever there?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the question is, who owns it, right?
Well, and that's a lot about what we talk about here, right, is digital ownership. So who owns that data? Because my contention is that, and that we talk a lot about on the show, is that as we've moved into this sort of digital realm, we've lost a lot of the rights to our data. That data ownership that we have in the physical world is sort of being taken from us as we move into this digital world. But that's not maybe front and center in this particular issue. So let's maybe summarize it for our audience.
But it is at the baseline of what Midge's whistleblower complaint is.
True. So let's dive into that.
It's at the heart of the complaint. We'll strip it here during the show and the time we've got, but definitely at the heart of the complaint is what you just said.
Yeah. Okay. So let's explore that more because, well, let me summarize first, and then we'll get into it. Right? Because I think you're right to call me out on that. Good point. Right. So Zatko really alleges that Twitter and certain senior executives, including the CEO, violated securities and trade laws by failing to address and fully notify the public of what he calls egregious deficiencies in user privacy, in digital and physical security, in platform integrity, in content moderation. And I took that from someplace, and I forget where it is, so I'm quoting someone, and I probably should be giving them credit. Sorry for that. He also raised some issues about the company's executives back in 2021. To give you a little bit bigger idea of how sort of broad his accusations are, here are sort of 5 quick takeaways that CBS News made the day following those accusations. So they summarized his accusations as Twitter's security and privacy systems were grossly inadequate. Twitter's entire service could have collapsed irreparably under stress. Twitter misled regulators, investors, and Elon Musk about bots and spam accounts. And on January 6th, 2021 during the Capitol riots. Twitter could have been at the mercy of disgruntled employees because virtually half the company had access to the core code, right? And that Twitter was a playground for foreign governments, that they were letting sort of other governments run amok within the organization. Those are some pretty huge accusations, obviously. And we've got the actual redacted whistleblower complaint. So I'm going to paste that into the stream here, and we'll also have that in the show notes. But that's a lot of stuff here. So with all that going on, I want to maybe ask you, James, first, and you can weigh on this too, Chris. Is Peter Zatko, Mudge, is he a legit critic? Should we believe these accusations?
So before we do that, I see that our fourth panelist has joined. So
oh, there we go. Hi, Violet.
Took me a second to get in. Technology, a little hard.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm glad to be in this conversation. Like we talked about before, I could have got the actual report, not the PR around it and what you're discussing now, but the actual redacted complaint was so interesting to me. I mean, I feel like we read things all the time on security, but it's almost like you're cheering for it because you're like, this is what every CISO says ever, right? We always, we all know people probably that have been fired for similar issues. And so it was just, I'm excited to talk about this.
Absolutely. Well, before we go to the questions, then why don't we introduce you, Violet? Violet is CIPPUS from Redpoint Cyber. She's also VP at Redpoint Cyber and the CIPPUS. Why don't you introduce yourself a little further to the audience?
Thank you. No, I think you actually summed it up.
Recording stopped.
Stopped recording. Is that a problem?
No, it's not. We stopped the triple redundant recording. Only that.
All right. Good to cut that then. It's always good to make it feel like we're believable, right? So I am an attorney that is always trying to be more technical. So that's why I'm on the forensic side now, because I've worked in 10 years on cybersecurity from the insurance risk management side, the operational insurance, like the notifications and the call centers and all those pieces, and worked on some big breaches early in my career. I got to work on Anthem with 78 million people and Home Depot and some of those huge ones that really threw me into the fire. Most lawyers in this space want to go and be breach coaches or privacy counsel, and I'm very opposite. I want to go on the front lines. I want to learn more tech stuff, and I love the privacy aspect too. So that's where I'm in now, and I also teach this at Baylor Law School for their LLM program. So I try to keep that as my neutral part of my bio, is that I can be neutral. I don't have to come at this from a forensic angle. I like to think about these things academically.
Nice. That's a really great perspective. Okay, so let's get to the question then. This is maybe a little bit orthogonal. Right? We could talk about the issues, but before we get there, right? Should we trust this guy who's making these accusations? To give a little bit more perspective.
Can I revert? Why should you not trust him?
Right.
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, this guy he worked for Google as a big time guy, right? He worked for the U.S. government. And
the guy worked at DARPA.
Yeah,
Do you know what the kind of stuff you have to go through just to be able to walk into a DARPA building, nevertheless work for DARPA?
Right.
The kind of integrity that's required of someone to be part of a DARPA project is not the same as someone enlisting in the Army and getting an 11 Bravo MOS and being an artillery guy, right? DARPA is three-letter agency type of background and integrity. Not to say that you can't question it, to say that in his entire career, has there ever been a time where someone looked at Mudge and said, I don't really trust this guy?
I doubt it, right? And
I will also second that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to James's question, because when I've talked to the technical people on this and the hacker credentials and credibility behind Mudge's experience, I haven't heard a single bad thing from the security community. The things that I've heard that have been questioning are more business related and operational. People that have tried to poke holes in this for the credentials and security backing, and what like what James just mentioned. I think that I've heard exactly the same thing as what you're describing.
Yeah. I think that's sort of where I come down on this too. The only real credible things that I've heard against him is maybe he wasn't a very good manager. Right. So
have you ever met someone who's super brilliant, who has excellent human skills?
Yeah.
Because I haven't. I mean, most people who are, we kind of promote based on merit, right? And we expect that someone in a leadership role have all the leadership qualities.
Yeah.
And they're going to figure it out. But when you look at someone like Mudge is kind of like a wide receiver on a football team, right? Like, he's not really the leader, but he's the guy who knows how the game is played and he knows how to win it every single time. And so, people always say that they have issues with leaders. I'm sure if you went and polled all of my, direct reports in all of my career to tell you, he was the worst guy I ever worked for. The guy doesn't know, he's a bad manager. I think there's always some of that feedback.
Yeah.
From a cybersecurity, just to mention, as I've been curious, and I hadn't heard the name much until this, but when I spoke to my friends in the cyber world, they all knew who this guy was. They all had a background. I heard the words prodigy, prophet of cybersecurity, a lot of like inflation, but I will say it really hit home to me when someone said, why did Twitter hire a hacker if they didn't want to hear what was wrong with their security? Like, what to expect, kind of.
But you have to look at so he got hired towards the end of Jack Dorsey's reign, right? He was one of Jack Dorsey's last hires before he left Twitter and handed it off to Parad. I mean, so he kind of came in where, I've had that happen to me as a CISO, where I get hired into an org and I'm reporting to person X, and 3 months later, person X leaves. And all of a sudden, you're reporting to a whole new structure. It's a different vision. It's a different approach to what's going on. And you find yourself, I don't want to say out of place, but you find yourself having to renew your merit because you were coming in with the backing of the chairman and CEO, and you're leaving. And all of a sudden they leave, and now you're finding yourself having to, reweigh that and reevaluate that decision.
Yeah.
So for the show, we reached out to the Federal Trade Commission to see if they wanted to send us something to speak on the topic. They responded politely, but curtly to say, sorry, not interested, kind of thing. Unfortunately, not that we expected otherwise, but what obviously would be an interesting question to get an answer to is whether or not Mudge had already declared if and when there is an actual penalty that's being assessed, what his kind of reward would be, and more importantly, where it would be going to. Because anecdotally, I think the largest fine that was handed out, I forgot if it was the SEC or the FTC, resulted in $100 million reward for that particular whistleblower in that particular case. And so if our math is right, which obviously it's a clickbait title, needless to say that we chose, but even if it's a fraction of that, the reward for the whistleblower should be pretty substantial. So that speaks to our earlier discussion whether or not there is a secondary or primary motive that's economical in nature.
So I'm going to put on my CISO hat.
Yeah.
Just a moment, right? Not my Mudge hat, not anything else, but just put on my CISO hat. The moment you become a whistleblower, your career is essentially over. You've signed the death certificate of a career, and if you look at Mudge, he's been part of this community forever.
Mm-hmm.
He lives, breathes security. So him coming forward with this, I don't think financial was top of mind.
Yeah, and I agree with that, right? I just brought it up because simply we don't know.
The money was somewhere in there. I'm not going to say that he didn't say, I stand to potentially make a lot of money on the back end of this. But I feel like when you're looking at the, I think Mudge's thought process here, having spoken to the guy a few times in a few events that we've attended together, right, is Elon Musk was about to buy Twitter, and in his due diligence, he was going to expose everything that was wrong with Twitter. When the deal fell through, and Parag and everyone said that they've given it, that there's no way for them to track the data, they were openly lying about specific things in that transaction. Then I think at that point he felt like there was a point in time where you got to bring truth to power. And I'm going to say that was his move. Because there's a comment, in one of the QA that says this is the type of issues that Mudge brings about in the Twitter and the whistleblower complaint are fairly common. That's true. I mean, we saw that with Equifax in the congressional hearings after their breach. We saw that with OPM, in 2014 after they exposed all of our data, anyone who served in the military's data at that point, and had a security clearance. Like you see the same kind of highlights of leadership not really changing the metrics, right? Because security is one of those industries where there's no clear metrics. If you're in marketing, there's very clear metrics. They're industry standard. Doesn't matter what line of business you're in. Doesn't matter if you're Home Depot or Facebook. Your marketing metrics are identical across the board. You go to the board with your metrics, your user acquisition cost, your all of that, and you kind of have a standard. Security doesn't have that, right? Security doesn't have strict KPIs across the board, meaning every company, and a lot of it is our fault as CISOs here, right? So I'm gonna kind of take a little bit of ownership to the fact that we haven't yet decided, or we kind of tend to tip the scales to where we feel the KPIs really speak volume to our work performance, or where we deem to have the greatest risk, and therefore we want to get the most attention. And that's across the board, because you don't have board-specific KPIs for cybersecurity. Those don't exist. So the complaint talking about Parag asking him to remove metrics, to change the terminology he's using, those are specifically, those happen across the board, I think, in most organizations.
So from your experience, you've never been in a situation where you felt compelled to bring
I won't do it. Yeah, I won't do it. I won't do it.
You won't go directly to the board, circumvent it?
I will go with my metrics. My metrics are well known. I present my metrics across the entire executive leadership. They don't change. My metrics don't change from the board to the executive leadership. I don't emit something from there to there. I won't do it. And I've pushed back. I've never been asked to do that per se. People have asked me, like, could you be a little bit more specific around these topics and other ones? So I'll add a slide, I won't remove. Or, you know what I mean? I'll add a metric, but I won't remove.
But in your experience, this is a general line item for a board meeting?
Speak to most CISOs at any kind of closed door event, and most will tell you that. I'll have to send my presentation to my boss and to my boss's boss, because you're typically second or third line security, depending on the size of your org, right? So you're second or third line executive leadership, you're not first line. So it'll go to whoever your direct boss is, and then they'll strip it and send it to their boss, who'll strip it some more, and then give it back to you, and you go from maybe a 12, 13 page slide deck to maybe 4.
Yeah, so the one thing that I'm unclear about still is when does something count as an official data breach that has the local requirement that you actually report it to the authorities within due course?
Depends on the state.
Right. So they're in California, right?
Right.
So that's like...
But they don't just have, they're in California, but they have every single thing to worry about. So
right.
It's going to be the 72 hours of GDPR. It's going to be India. It's going to be every single one. And so you just work backwards, because you're going to have to notify everyone. There's not like a fail-safe. So.
Yeah, and then the detail is what is considered a data breach, because a lot of the things that he mentioned, it's kind of questionable whether or not you can call that a data breach or it's just data insecurity. I don't know.
So there's a clear definition of what a data breach is, right? Because the data notification laws clearly state what is a breach and when you're legally required to notify that state's attorney general that X amount of people in that state have had their data exposed. The question is, and this is, kind of I want to say it's unspoken, but I think there's lawyers, sorry, Violet, lawyers sometimes tend to go, well, is it a breach though? Or is it an event?
Is it?
Is it? Can we unilaterally say that this was what it was? And could we buy time? And could we potentially buy this data back? And could we potentially do 500 other things in order not to declare it? I think in Twitter's case, I think it's probably a little bit more malicious than that, personally, but I have personal feelings towards Twitter. But it wouldn't surprise me to see someone say, we've had X amount of data exposed and we're just gonna. I've seen lawyers look at a data breach, right?
They're trying to. That's what they're trying to do for the client. They're trying to back out of it, right? Like their focus is to say, how can we not have this fit the definition? But the definition that you describe, in California specifically, is when you have personal information unencrypted, which is also a question of which state you're in, is if there's an unencrypted safe harbor or is an encrypted safe harbor, and it's either acquired or reasonably believed to have been acquired by that unauthorized person. So it is the unauthorized person having access to the data. Different definitions though, because James, you said it's pretty clear by state. Some of it makes you have to have it leaving. So even if someone's inside, where some of it, a ransomware attack or incident where someone comes in but doesn't actually steal the data, but they still had access and an unauthorized person got access. Access is one part of the definition. There's other definitions that need to show that
there's exfiltration, there's exfiltration, right?
Yeah.
There's
so
exfiltration.
I think that's why.
And then there's establishing residency. Right. FYI, lawyers are really smart about arguing this point, establishing residency. Meaning, if you're, for example, registered and you live in the state of Texas, but
we're gonna figure out how to not get you in California.
Your IP address rotates around, right? So you're in California for 3 days, you're in New York for 4 days, you're in Oklahoma. Then do you, by definition of Texas state law, qualify as a resident of that state? So if the state of Texas says that in order for you to be a resident, you have to be in the state of Texas 210 days a year, does your IP address over the last 365 days register that you are in the state of Texas 200, or can I take you off the Texas list and not have to report it? And then I can take away the threshold of the reporting. Because if the threshold reporting for that state is 50,000 people in that state,
and you get $499.99, right?
Right. Then you're under the threshold. You don't have to report it.
So one of the other things, James, that you're bringing up that I think is so interesting is like the whole reason, and this goes back to this privacy group that Jeff and Chris bring us to, is the whole reason for the laws is to protect the individual. And when we start arguing about these things, it takes it away from the individual because we're arguing about one person out of 50,000, right? And it takes out the meaning, this arguing over what is a data breach and how can we work backwards. It takes out the privacy focus and getting us back to the whole meaning of data breach notification laws and this new federal law that's coming out is to focus on the privacy and the
there's three different data breach federal notification laws that are kind of roaming around. Like there are 2 different federal data privacy bills that are floating around, and there's significant pushback on data breach notification. No, because of superseding state authority.
Yeah.
So a lot of states are saying you can't just go report it to the federal authorities and be done with it. Go report it. The feds can make you report it to the FTC as a data breach, but you still have to report it to my AG, and we can still open an investigation. And that's the pushback, by the way, by many, many, many states.
Might need to redirect back to well, I saw one of the questions come in on Mudge though. That someone just said, yes, praise him, but let's talk about how we might not be able to accept it blindly. We can't just we got to throw in some questioning, right, with his timing. And I don't know what the questions are, but maybe that's what we can put on our devil's advocate hat and see.
Oh yeah, Jeff, do we know what the date was on that filing actually before it was publicized? It was probably much earlier, right?
Yeah, it was
July
filed
6th,
on July 6th.
2022.
It was right around the time Elon Musk was about to pull out of the Twitter deal.
Yeah,
It was
but
probably
usually,
after-
yeah, usually it
10 days
requires.
after
Yeah.
the FTC settlement got announced with Twitter. So there was an updated FTC settlement of May 25th, 2020 with basically going back to the 2011 FTC thing. And so they just paid, what, I think I pulled it up, it was something million, I don't know.
Was it 25?
May 25 was FTC, they paid 150 million.
Oh yeah.
On May 25th, that was 9 days before, doing my math wrong, 11 days before this whistleblower.
Yeah, but I mean, chances are this took weeks to prepare, right? At least.
The fact that it was filed in July doesn't mean that they took it in July. I mean, I think this was he came through with this probably 3 to 4 months beforehand. Right, and they were having a conversation. That fine came through, and I think the FTC had him sign the fine and bring it through, knowing that they've got this whistleblower complaint on the back end to come through with it, right? But they wanted to get their signatures on record. They wanted to get them to pay a fine on record, to make an example out of them. The FTC is looking
about that.
The FTC is looking at the FTC is looking to develop some teeth, because up until now, right, this agency has been probably, a failing agency, you could argue, right? I mean, in all reality, you still have, scammers scamming individuals in this country on a day-by-day basis. The only thing you can do is call the FTC and go, hey, I'm getting a call from someone pretending to be Amazon, Norton, Microsoft, robbing me of $400 or $500 at a time, right? You have title fraud going on in this country at an unfathomable pace, impacting people's home ownership. And the FTC, which is really the body that's supposed to be safeguarding the consumers, haven't done anything about it. So they're looking for getting a bite out of someone that will set the standard and make everyone respect the FTC again. Not that people didn't before, but you looked at kind of like the FTC as being one of those agencies you can talk to and, kind of pay a Starbucks coffee daily type of fine, right? What's $150 million to a company that's worth, $35 billion? It's kind of like, the $5 billion fine that Facebook paid in Europe and GDPR was their daily revenue, right? Mm-hmm. It was like 1 day's revenue for a GDPR fine.
No, that was an FTC.
That was the FTC settlement, yeah.
That was the FTC settlement?
Yeah, that was actually
yeah, and that was like a daily revenue. That was like Facebook's daily revenue.
Yeah, cost of doing business, right?
Yeah.
So that's why there in Europe, as you probably know, there's other fines that are actually related back to income, right? So there's some countries in Europe where if you're speeding, then the fine is according what your income is, rather than making everybody.
Finland, right?
Yes.
There was like a guy in Finland that got like a $10,000 speeding ticket.
No, someone got a $150,000 speeding ticket. I won't mention who it is at this point.
So, hey guys, we got a couple questions in the feed we should probably try to address. So Brandon says, has anyone considered that no one in the Valley is immune to these issues? As a security engineer, having worked at FANGs, these complaints are available as an acquisition target when the deal falls through.
I think there's some merit to that, and I think we talked about it a minute. I think I brought it up a little bit ago where I said like these are the most of the complaints that Mudge brought up are pretty common, right? But I haven't seen a whistleblower complaint come when an acquisition's fallen through before. And this now we know based on when this was published and when this was done that this was happening during the acquisition, not before or not when it fell through.
Right. That timing is important. Agreed.
Right, and so this was going on before. And by the way, this could be something where lawyers talk to other lawyers, and the lawyer Violet can attest to the fact that the lawyer community is kind of like the CISO community. You kind of know everyone in your area. wouldn't be far-fetched that Elon Musk blew up the deal on a few things, one of which being that he probably got note that there was a whistleblower complaint sitting with the FTC. His lawyers may have been known, but they couldn't say anything about it, so they blew up the deal, insisted that the data wasn't being accurate, knowing that once this came through, that was going to be their saving grace, and he was going to get his 50% discount on Twitter.
Right.
Well, it's timing wise, it is an interesting theory but I would say I wouldn't limit it to just the lawyers talking. Like, I think that Elon Musk and crew is probably so well connected that if this was happening, and you see in the whistleblower complaint, like, so many points and dates and schedule. I mean, this was, you got to know there were Slack channels going, Mudge is pissed off, or like, there's got to be some other way that this could be communicated. I actually would think it would be some other random thing like that, like not just the
like
lawyers.
I think like it's an internal employee during due diligence going like, hey, how would you attribute? Why would you attribute the fact that you guys lost your CISO in January of this year?
Yeah.
Right? And someone would be like, oh, he's super pissed. I mean, he was inadequacy or something along those lines, and maybe that brought about some questions. I
feel like we're kind of
flow with that.
underestimating the power Elon Musk probably has to gather that information. So if it was out there, and if this thing is true, again, like we're not assuming the whistleblower complaint is 100% true, but if it was true, it would have been known to more people besides Mudge that these things were happening.
Well, when you enter a whistleblower complaint, you're really signing a strict non-disclosure, right? You're not
totally,
really
but it doesn't mean that the stuff that happened other people didn't see or witness. And
correct, but I don't think. I mean, it could have been that Musk's team knew that he was agitated, left unhappily, right? Was dismissed. Could have been that through due diligence they reach out to him, and he had lawyers called his lawyers and say, we can't talk about it. We have other proceedings pending against, we're in conflict here. We can't help you.
I think you're forgetting that every single person mentioned in this complaint has family, has friends, has like you're missing that when it says I'm looking at it now, but when it says like they told, and there were other leadership people mentioned, you're not realizing that they're going to sleep that night being like, Mudge told me to do this and I don't want to lie, and like you're missing the human element that this isn't about an NDA and lawyers. Like, this is about a period of transgression that happened, that he was not under NDA when it happened, even though he's not talking about it. The people around him that see facial clues and see his whole spirit sink because he's pissed off, whatever. Like, there's so many other pieces to this that I think could have been out there that we don't know about. That's just my point, is that it's NDA world sounds great, but there's things that could be known.
Look, I will say this: whenever you hire a new CISO, one of the first things we do, right, in the first 90 days, we do staff evaluation. We're kind of, looking at the overall company, building relationships, having the conversations. You're trying to identify how you're going to start about executing your security strategy, how you're going to develop it, and that's within the first 90 days. You got to remember, I think Mudge was at Twitter for a total of 15 months, 60. I mean, he was just at the very beginning. I mean, he hasn't even started picking up steam. But if you look at the security hires, so go to LinkedIn, start looking at the security hires around 60 days into Mudge's tenure until about 30 days after he left, you'll start to see that he kind of brings his own people, because that's how we work. Like, that's how people, like CISOs, we have directors that will only want to work with you, that'll want to, kind of continue to go where you go. And there's engineers that want to do the same, and architects and analysts and so forth. And so it's not far-fetched that when he was dismissed, a lot of those people stayed around waiting for him to get his next gig, right? Or started looking to go work somewhere else temporarily until Mudge landed somewhere. And some of those people were privy to the due diligence going on by Team Musk as they were getting ready to buy Twitter, and could have dropped a few things in there. I mean, you're right. I don't dismiss that. I think there's a slew of reasons why this would why the timing of this is suspicious, but I think the timing of this at this point is purely coincidental. I don't think it has much to do with the malice of the Musk deal falling through.
So did you read the final complaint?
I've read most of it.
Okay, and so I mean, Twitter was saying that their security policies, after they tightened it up in 2020, were within industry standards. So based on that description, does it strike you as industry standard?
No.
Okay.
Industry standard is regulator talk. it's due diligence talk, it's audit talk, right? We follow industry best practices. Now, again, this will go to my previous kind of statement around the idea of how does CISOs report to the board and what are your KPIs. So what are your industry best practices? Are you following NIST, following CIS? Are you looking at MITRE? You know, what exactly are you following as a security industry best practice? Because there's many of them, right? There's not one standard. There's dozens of standards in security. And most organizations will take a little bit from every standard to build a security policy because you've got your tech stack is very different, your challenges are very different. And so some parts of this, you know, kind of industry standard like NIST 853 might be a good fit for you, and some stuff of MITRE ATT&CK could be better, and some stuff from the CIS top 18 could fit what you're trying to accomplish better.
Yeah,
So,
my personal standard is you get access to it if you show me a warrant. It doesn't matter if you work there or not.
yeah, I mean, industry best practices is such a it's such a lawyer term. Sorry, Vanya. It's such a lawyer term, right?
Well, it seems to me that the fact that they've, you know, got 50% of the people or 50% of the engineers with access to the code base, I mean, how is that responsible under anybody's best standards?
So how much of that is in the control of a CISO?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it is, right? But
you can build an identity access management policy, you can set up a RBAC policy, you can set a PAM policy, and you can have your VP of engineering say, I need all of these engineers to have access because all of these guys are working on different projects that they need to be able to push. And they'll go into a leadership meeting where a security person will stand up like Mudge and say, we probably shouldn't be doing this for all of these reasons. And then engineering will say, well, this will impact business. And you've got revenue saying, yeah, well, we're not going to make any money on a business that hasn't made any money, right? Like Twitter hasn't made $1 for anyone, right? Like Twitter's a Ponzi scheme. It's the ultimate Ponzi scheme. Like this is a business that makes no money. It hasn't made money since it was like established. Like how this company went public, how this company continues to trade at where it trades and continues to be valued at where it's valued is quite frankly mind-boggling. It's literally Twitter's like the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. That's what it is. It's everything that happened in 2008 in one company, Twitter.
I don't think marketers and ad tech would agree.
Yeah, it's more nuanced than
the
that.
company
Yeah.
doesn't make money.
Yeah.
They may make money. They may get cheap advertising. They may be able to scoop up their KPIs. But at the end of the day, Twitter as a company hasn't made money, hasn't paid one investor back duly because of the fact that it was a smart business that made money. It's never made money. In its history, it hasn't made money. Look at its financials. It's a business that hasn't made money.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon didn't make money for a very, very long time either. They had a more long-term plan, but yeah, arguably, you can
what's
describe.
Twitter's long-term plan to make money? Because Facebook's figured it out, LinkedIn's figured it out.
Yeah, I think it's more like Doge, right? So it's a meme stock.
I thought it was OnlyFans. That was the way they were going to make money, but that didn't quite work.
OnlyFans makes money, and lots of it. It's a better investment than Twitter, right? I mean, honestly, like Twitter doesn't make money. Their financials don't add up.
Let's see, guys. I got another question for you. So, what's most worrying about these revelations? There's so many of them, right? Is it the SEC violations? Is it employees installing spyware? Is it interactions with China, including things like these Twitter custom audiences? I mean, there's so many different things that we could talk about here, but I mean, it's hard to even sort of share with the audience the scale of the different types of problems that Mudge sort of outlines with with Twitter here?
I think you have to look at the whistleblower complaint, and if you took it apart, and I did, right, and you kind of brought up the custom audiences, China, foreign governments, the whole nine, right? I think those are more media talking points, right? Than they're concerns, but I think unless you're oblivious, you thought that these weren't going on, right? I mean, you would have had to like not be on planet Earth to realize that there are foreign governments that use Twitter for espionage and everything else that they do. Like, that to me is just not a surprise. But if you look at really what he talks about, I think there's the spyware aspect of it. I think it's the access of employees to customer data and how freely people could access customer data is probably more concerning, because there's an external privacy policy and there's an internal privacy policy of how the company internally deals and accesses private information. And I feel like that to me is probably more of a red flag. Anything around foreign government from a Silicon Valley company to me is just like, okay, that's standard operating procedure at this point.
Yeah, so there's a couple things we could go there, but so let's talk about the access to personal data, and even maybe a little bit in perspective. So we talked before about employees having so much access to code. Is that sort of in combination, access to code and access to personal data? Is that sort of, in my mind, that's sort of endemic of them not having control of sort of anything, if they can't have access, if they can't put access to the code and they can't put access to personal data, it sounds like they're not trying very hard.
So are you saying that they derelicted their duties when it comes to their users?
Well, you said that, not me, but I think I would say, yeah. Doesn't sound like they're trying very hard to put controls in place.
Or could Twitter be such a toxic culture as a company that any sort of changes from the startup garage mode to a publicly traded company that has to do financial reporting in the SEC is just so bad? Could that have been one of the things that maybe Musk saw the potential in Twitter and wanted to clean up as part of his acquisition? Meaning, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that people leave companies and move around, and you get a lot about another company through job interview and interviewing people who've left that company. Twitter did have a reputation among engineers in the Valley as being kind of a Wild West type of environment, not a very kind of not a very good workplace to be at. It's kind of crazy. So if you didn't conform to what the mainstream of Twitter employees wanted, you probably weren't going to stick around for very long. So could that have been?
It's an interesting question. I mean, if I was to sort of take a look at this from an Elon perspective before all of this bot crap and the other stuff in the free speech talk, sort of started to happen. I think it wasn't necessarily a stupid decision to think that he might be able to find value in an organization like Twitter. If I look at it from, he thought he could come in and try to figure out how to do content moderation better, and that he didn't think about the bot question, and he thought he could maybe do that better. I'm not so sure that I buy any of the crap that he's trying to float to the press right now to try to back out of this deal. But maybe his original intention, I thought, might have actually been a pretty good idea to buy it. But not if he thought...
They did subpoena Mudge, right? His lawyers have subpoenaed Mudge for their October hearing with Twitter.
Yeah.
And if you don't think they got the full whistleblower complaint and are going through their due diligence, and are going to go in and prove to the fact that they lied on their due diligence, not just about the bots, but that they can't be trusted at all. And I think that's, if you look at the overall complaint, Musk and his team didn't trust any of the information they were getting from Twitter leadership, maybe outside of their financials. This only kind of gives them more leverage going into that hearing.
Well, there's two things there, right? So one is the bot question, and two is fraud. So if he can prove that they were fraudulent in their representations, then he wins, right? I think that's going to be.
He gets Twitter at 10 cents to the dollar, right. At that point, right? They're going to be begging him to take it.
My guess is that that's going to be a hard thing to prove, even with Mudge's representations. But I'm not a lawyer, so
unless Mudge comes with clear evidence,
right?
And it said that he has emails from Parag telling him to do stuff, Slack messages, all kind. I mean, he did keep a complete digital history of his entire communication with leadership.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I'm not sure there, but
well, there's even an excerpt in the actual complaint of the email. I mean, you can see the actual emails, so we know that they're there. We know that there is evidence and there is history, and I think that that's going to be really important on the fraud aspect.
Yeah. So
I think you're gonna. I mean, if
but on the bot aspect, I don't think that Mudge proves Elon's case on bots, because I don't think Twitter ever represented that there were less than 5% bots. So
they did say that 5%, less than 5% of our users are bots. Bots only account for a small percentage, and if they account for more, then they lied and they misrepresented that on their investor calls, on their shareholder calls,
and on Twitter itself. Like that
right.
is actually screenshotted in the complaint as well. That the actual tweet coming from the top is that they are representing that they have done the due diligence, and they use very strong language in that tweet that really holds them to. I mean, again, it's a tweet, but it goes to James's point. So sorry to interrupt you, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So since we're 10 minutes to the top of the hour, I wanted to mention that if anybody in the audience wants to chime in, just click the button that raises your hand, and we'll move you to the panel where you can obviously also just post your question.
Oh, sorry. Just seeing a note from Colin, who we sort of invited. He may be there, and we could probably pull him in if he's still.
No, I don't see him. So
okay,
he might not be there. But yeah, so maybe to expand on Elon's thing, I think people by and large make too much of that. I don't think that the whole Twitter thing is occupying much of his mind space. I think it's a distant third at best when you send rockets into low Earth orbit and otherwise have a multi-billion-dollar car company to run, and social media companies are probably not as relevant to your daily life, I would assume. I could be wrong. Because
I mean, Ben Shapiro made a good case to the fact that all of this was just to sync Twitter. Because there was a question here: is this game to sync Twitter? Ben Shapiro a few weeks ago on his show made a really compelling argument. He said that at worst he'd have to pay him $1 billion, but what he did in order to buy Twitter is he liquidated a lot of his Tesla stock. And he did it with the single purpose of saying, I'm liquidating the stock to go buy Twitter. So what if he just liquidated his Tesla stock knowing we're headed into a recession, saying he's buying Twitter, and then he pays $1 billion fine, pays $1 billion tax as part of a liquidation of a stock there in order to save himself a tax bill. I mean, not far-fetched.
Yeah.
Not far-fetched. I mean, Ben Shapiro makes it sound way better than I do, but by all means, I mean, he kind of.
No, if you know Elon's history, he obviously doesn't care much about financial gains, right? I mean, he put all of his savings at risk several times, right?
Right.
So he is not profit motivated entirely. His focus is like literally getting us off this little rock floating in this vast emptiness.
Then why buy Twitter at that point? If that's your purpose, why buy that?
Well, I have a very good argument for that, right? But then I go into one of my long tirades. The cliff notes here, though, is human collaboration. I mean, the fact that you're listening to me right now and that you see everything that you're seeing around you is based on human collaboration, and a subset of that is human cooperation. And we're using these communication tools to do that, right? So the primary technology that we're using is language, and the primary tools to distribute the make use of that tool right now are these social media companies. But if we let these allow to be bastardized like they're being, then it leads to all sorts of real world externalities. I think he intuitively realizes that, right? And not too many people do that.
You know, to me, what's really fascinating about this is Elon Musk is kind of like a cultural phenomenon for all of us.
Yep.
Right? And the Mudge complaint on Twitter is almost like we're trying to take two things that are in the similar playing field, but maybe not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Musk's decision was probably more patriotic, more free speech, more mission driven.
Yeah.
Mudge was likely more of a, I don't want to say similar intentions, but probably like at some point they're going to report something happened when I was there, and I'm going to get ahead of it, and go do this to save my reputation.
Yeah.
Maybe I was shackled.
Yeah. It almost feels like he didn't have a choice, really, right? You're not leaving me any choice. I'm trying to do the right thing here. You're not letting me, and then on top of that, you're firing me. It's like, okay, that's
right. He didn't want to be Grim Payne.
Right.
For those who don't know, he was the CIO over at Equifax. He was the guy who didn't forward the email during a congressional hearing. Mudge didn't want to be the guy that when Parag says, we've let governments mine U.S. consumer data and global consumer data. We've let the Russian and Chinese in. We've let Iran in. We've let North Korea in. We've let the Saudis in because they do have Saudi stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. And we've done all these things with all these questionable governments, really violating our terms of use. Going to a congressional hearing and saying, well, our chief security officer was responsible for that, and that's why we fired him. And his name was Mudge. And right, so Mudge may have wanted to preempt that live hearing of Parag sitting in front of a Ted Cruz or a Jim Jordan and have an answer that type of question.
Yeah. Also, do we know whether or not he was like interviewing for other positions before, or what is he doing? Do we know that?
It's unknown.
Okay.
For at least I haven't seen anything that said he was interviewing anywhere else.
Yeah.
I think you were sort of prescient earlier, James, about him probably not getting another CISO job. I think he'll probably have lots of opportunities to, be, researcher, red team. He'll make lots of money, but not as a CISO.
He'll make a ton of money, not as a CISO, as a consultant, right? He'll probably start his own firm, right? And for once, someone isn't failing upwards. He's actually earning his upward promotion to go up. We've seen way too many people fail upward, right? Like be part of something where failure kind of lies on them, and then all of a sudden they become millionaires from failure. But in his case, go ahead, Violet.
No, I was just going to bring back up, I didn't mean, the FTC issue, right? Like the whole reason we were brought here, we started at the beginning of that. We got sidetracked with kind of bringing it in on the timing with Elon. But were there any outstanding questions at the very end of kind of what do we think the FTC is going to do? Because they just fined him, what was it, whatever that number I read off in May 25th this year for a violation of the 2011 FTC order.
Yeah, it was. They did just fine him $150 million, and now they've essentially violated that consent order and the previous one.
Right.
I mean, you could be looking at not just the FTC here; it's probably the SEC.
Yeah.
I mean, Mudge has already been subpoenaed for a Senate hearing to talk about his findings on Twitter. So he's already been subpoenaed to go and testify to that. Not far-fetched that we see the full force of every single federal regulator that oversees this, including the FCC, by the way. Don't discount the Federal Communication Commission coming through on this one too, and going like, oh well, what have you violated when it comes to FCC guidance and rules within there, and you know.
Is this $1 billion fine? I mean, Twitter having.
I think this is going to I think the total fine here will bypass the $5 billion Facebook.
Will surpass it, do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, this is too far over egregious compounding issues, right? Like
Right.
we're so far beyond what it took to even get to 5 billion.
And again, then there'll be someone there to pick up those pieces. His name is Moon Man, aka Mr. Electric Car, aka.
And
Give me a
it
good
already,
reason, I'll dance.
stock price already went down 7% the day that this thing came out. I don't know how much it's gone. I haven't kept up with it since then. Like that was just day one. I don't know. Have you kept
Yeah,
up?
I mean the market's been in a bruising for a while, right? So Twitter stock's been one of those as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is reversion to the mean. If you understand macroeconomics, it's gonna go back to the level of global national GDP ultimately. But yeah, a different story for a different day. We're at the top of the hour where we talk about what we're gonna talk about next week, which I don't know if we talked about that.
We haven't yet. So next week we talk about the surveillance economy, Chris. The FTC is actually holding hearings on Thursday next week, which we're going to be listening into. And also we're going to talk about the Kochava FTC case. They're filing suit against a large data broker, Kochava, for a lot of different things, but primarily location data that they're selling in the open market that lets people get tracked to, a variety of places, abortion centers, churches, wherever, sensitive locations. And it's interesting because if that suit holds up, it may actually hold organizations, particularly data brokers, accountable for data that they claim is anonymized, but actually isn't. So that's what we talk about next week. We want to thank everyone who's here today, particularly our panelists, James Azar and Violet Sullivan. Appreciate the conversation, folks. This was really fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Join us next week.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye bye, guys.